I didn't think this was going to happen. We tried a couple of times. They tried to not make it happen, I suppose, but finally we sit down for the first GGRecon panel. An assortment of professionals that are highly qualified to talk about the off-season, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Short introduction, we have Noukky, General Manager of the London Spitfire, Grant, VP of Esports Business at Washington Justice, Pri, General Manager of the Boston Uprising, and Barroi, General Manager of the Vancouver Titans. Now, we meet at an interesting date because today, or depending on the time zone where you are, I guess yesterday, it was the 5-year anniversary of the Overwatch League, right? And, you know, the league started with big aspirations. Now we have a new situation where we need to adjust to the market realities that we're in, both for the Overwatch League and the esports at large, I would say. So we're going to talk about the off-season and how things move, and pretty much also not just the general, but also how this off-season went and how we're going to adjust to these realities. So I suppose, I guess, for someone like, let's say, Noukky, because you have been the general manager of the Spitfire for a while, when does your off-season prep officially start?
Off-season prep basically starts as soon as the season is over. Like, I'm talking to coaches about like who we want to keep, who we want to release, like what the plan is for next year. And then we talk about like what strategies we want to use for acquiring players that the coaches would like to have.
Right. Okay, some of you guys, of course, took over the job recently and didn't have as much time. Let's say Pri, like you came in presumably a little bit late. I think some of the teams like to have like a wind-up time where they can already contact players during the running season and then, you know, have long-term plans. How much does that impact your ability to build a team when you have to start from scratch?
Yeah, it definitely slowed us down quite a bit. I was pretty public about the fact that we really wanted to make sure that we had our coaching structure in place first. That's a mistake that I've made in the past where I thought that, I mean, if you look at like the Uprising roster that I kind of sort of inherited, there were players on that roster that if it were just up to me, I could look at their contract, look at the player, and say, hey, you know what, this might make sense. Let's keep this guy around, especially in the window of time where we have an exclusive opportunity to negotiate with them, which I did have a little bit of overlap when I came over to talk to them. But for me, a couple of those contracts, we tried to be really open about, you know, which ones were just running out, and that's why we weren't keeping those folks around. A number of those people we flagged and we said, hey, we're not going to take your option year, but we do still want to talk about keeping you around once we get these coaches in place. So I think we were able to make it work, but it was tight, and there is kind of some thanks due to the Boston Uprising players that didn't return, who were all really reasonable about saying, yeah, you know what, like we get it, you guys need a little bit of extra time. We'll talk to other teams, but we'll leave the door open for you guys if it goes that way. It didn't, but we were able to, I think, split ways amicably with most folks.
Right. Barroi, like you took over in the middle of the season. I presume, like, given the situation, you probably already were thinking about next year and what kind of plans you were going to make? Or was that more like something, okay, let's see the market realities and like who's available, whatnot? Depending on your budget, I guess, like it's not like you probably will always get your top picks, right?
Yeah, I mean, you always think about next year, I guess, to some extent, but really, when it started for us was like when our season ended, which was pretty early because I think we were the first team that was officially like out. And we had like the last week of regular season was a bye week for us, so our off season started relatively early, and then it's basically similar to Pri, where I want to make sure that we have a coaching structure in place first, and then look at players afterwards. I did talk to players where I was allowed to, like doing the season, but honestly, it was just to like build relations. I don't think, yeah, I think most of those players didn't end up coming here, so it's just kind of like seeing where some of these guys are headed, if they're still like if they're still wanting to be on like that team that they're at right now, or if they're going somewhere else. But yeah, generally, I guess that's also dependent on the team that they're with, because it's usually a question of if the other general managers allow me to like talk to them. But yeah, I think we had a good heads up start just because our season ended so early.
All right, makes sense. Now, of course, pretty big topic each year, and probably a fight for all of you guys is justifying a budget or pushing it through to, ownership. So how does one go about like trying to negotiate a budget internally and, get that approved, Grant? How does it work?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think every year you kind of approach it differently, right? I think at the end of the day, the off season for those of us running running the business really starts with, why are you asking for the amount of money that you're going to ask for, right? Is it you feel like there's a strong ROI to being competitive in the upcoming season? You feel like there are social or sponsorship goals where, being an 8th place team in the league versus being a 4th place team, like that difference in spend, and it makes the difference. And it's not exact science, right? And Aaron's had the previous experience of being with us for a few of those exercises where you're often giving a range, right? Where it's we expect to spend X amount of money based on how kind of the off-season market is shaping up to be. And if we spend that, we hope or think that amount of money more or less guarantees you a certain placement based on what the other teams are spending. And you kind of take that up the chain to ownership and your investors, depending on kind of how your franchise is structured, and explain like, this is why we think it is worth being a playoff contending team this year, or this is why we think it's worth being a 12th place team this year, and kind of so on and so forth. So, I think for us, the off season starts a little earlier in terms of you really need to be very forward looking in terms of why are you going to ask for the amount of money that you're going to ask for, and then you adjust as the offseason develops, right? You might find a San Francisco Shock all of a sudden spends a lot of money on some players. You might see that the Houston Outlaws open up and spend a lot of money on players, and so you kind of need to be updating those projections in real time. But again, you go in with kind of a baseline of we think we need to spend X to achieve Y, and here's kind of our Z reasoning for doing so.
Right. Of course. I think at least the community somehow expects that you brought the war chest pre. Like, you had the golden pitch, like, you were able to basically buy everyone. There were probably no, barriers to who you've gotten, other than maybe, like, some of the Shock guys, of course. Is that true? Like, did you guys just, like, decide, okay, we're going to be a competitive team for the title this year, and what we need to spend, that's the amount we will spend?
Not exactly. So I don't think that we will end up in the top 5 spenders this year. I think specifically when we built the roster that we did, there were a couple of things that we tried to focus on. We did try to build fast. That was a goal for us. In the past, I've gotten into the position where if you wait too long, all of a sudden, like, you need a player with XYZ player hero pool, but he doesn't like to play with this guy, or this person doesn't want to be on an all Korean team, doesn't want to be on a mixed team. This person is thinking about going back to college. Like, all of a sudden, like, the talent pool, I think, dries up faster than I would have liked to have in the past. And this was kind of an opportunity where we said, it's really deep right now. It's almost like a buyer's market as far as like a lot of these players that we looked at. We could say, like, you're a great player, but there's 3 or 4 other free agents that we don't have to pay a buyout, that there is not as much competition as far as like there's uncertainty in the league right now, and so we can kind of come in with this fully formed, this is the team we want to build, this is how we want to build it, these are the people you're going to be playing next to. So yeah, I think we're obviously, we're not going to be a budget team this year, but the goal wasn't to be irresponsible. I think to Grant's point, we definitely came in with a vision. There were decisions that we made as far as passing up certain players that didn't fit our budget. But it is also something where I don't think everyone's fully aware of kind of the ownership picture here. Oxygen is now the kind of owner operator of the Uprising franchise. And they saw this opportunity to say, you know what, this is like a different version of Boston than people have seen in the past. And we want to kind of come out strong with that. So we obviously, we're not coming in here saying that we're going to be this ridiculously cost-effective roster either. I think our players are fairly compensated, and we do want to be a team that wins this year. That was to Grant's point as far as like the X plus Y to get to Z. The Z for us was winning. The championship, there's a lot of RNG in this league, but certainly being a team that's performant that we can be proud of.
What's the benefit that you can sell? Is it just like it's good to have a title and have that on your on your docket and like
Sell
be
as
able
far as like as far as like to the owners to get the budget that we wanted, or
Yes.
selling to the players to get here?
to the owners specifically?
Yeah, so I think we had that benefit that versus other teams, we are trying to kind of reset the identity of this franchise a bit. And so that is something where I think we got a bit of we were more open to financial flexibility on some of these players. We also, I think, one of the things I really like that we're doing is, we are a franchise that benefits from ownership in the Call of Duty League. We just, signed some great players in our Rocket League team. And so there is kind of an economy of scale here where as we build a stronger team, we can start, sharing sponsorships across these teams. We can, there's a great land center, the Helix Land Center up in Patriots Place in Foxborough. There's homestands that you can sell tickets and you have better opportunities to sell merch. So I think one of the things that I like that the Uprising has upside for is that you can kind of justify a little bit more spend because we're expecting to through sponsorships, events, and kind of being part of this esports ecosystem, get a little bit more on the back end as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, fans, and sorry for jumping in, Yiska. And
No,
you
sure.
can shun me later for this, but ROI is a very difficult term to kind of quantify from a fan perspective, right? I think, and this is not a problem that's unique to Overwatch. This isn't a problem that's unique to CDL or LCS. If you pick an esports league at will, minus maybe Valorant, just because of how their team entities are structured and the relationship they have with Riot, you tend to have this equation where teams benefit to a certain extent by winning, right? And whether that's through increased prize money, increased sponsorship sales, increased merch sales, maybe you have localized fan events like Aaron was talking about. There's a certain number of buckets that kind of go up the more you win, and maybe they go up less if you're kind of a mediocre or mid-table team. The general challenge with esports has been that the cost of players to achieve those levels of winning don't always get offset by the amount that sponsorships go up or the amount that prize pool goes up or the amount that take your pick of those buckets kind of increase. And so when you think about building a team in the offseason, you're essentially trying to solve for how do we create a team that drives increases in those buckets that offset the extra cost of players, right? How do we, if we finish 12th, does that make merch sales go up by 20%, tickets go up by 20%, and the actual increase to be a 12th place team in the league is 10% of whatever the total amount of money is?
Right. Roy, presumably this was your first time having to pitch a budget. How did you go about it?
The biggest thing for or like one of the biggest things for our company is that like there has to be some economical like feasibility, and there were some things that weren't in the budget last year or in the last few years of the Titans that I wanted in there for sure, that just increased it a little bit, but there were other factors where we had to decrease our budget just so we can try to get as much to a break-even point in terms of sponsorships to actual spend on the team as possible. And I think if we if we reach our sponsorship and partnership goals this year, which is somewhat likely, then we will actually almost break even, I think. Which is a pretty big deal because especially for the Titans, they really spent hard in 2019, right? With Runaway. But afterwards they were kind of taken aback, I guess, by I assume by how little return there was for spending that amount of money. And from there on, they kind of got a better grasp on what is economical, like feasible. And that is still the case right now, where I think we are kind of getting into like a balance point where our budget compared to last year decreased slightly, but it makes more sense economically. And it's still okay enough to not be last place if I do my job correctly. And I think the Titans had that going for them in the last season as well, but maybe there were some issues with the roster and stuff that was not scouted correctly. But generally, the idea is of the company to kind of not to lose too much money on the esports side. And I guess there's also a long-term idea of kind of building the franchise back up because it was so because we had poor results in the last few years where I got kind of a direction of if this year is going better, then we'll get a nice budget increase for 2024. So kind of an idea was to get like hopefully a couple more good players on our team and then build from there for the next year. And with that, hopefully there comes also more sponsorship money and all of that.
For sure. Now, someone that, we pretty publicly know that they are on top of the budget, but did pretty well last year. Arguably, I would have to think and quantify, but I think that's probably second best performance of a low budget tier roster after maybe Boston Uprising season 1. Noukky, you guys had to once again budget this year. What's the plan? Did you guys remain about the same? Did you get upgrades based on your performance? And did you feel like you were accurately rewarded for what you did in the last season?
Our budget didn't really change too much for this year. It's basically pretty static for what we're getting for the team. But I think one thing that helped us was the performance last season when it comes to being attractive for players, because our whole team principle that we started building in 2021 was having a really, really good team environment and having basically a desirable team to be in, even though we are one of the lower budget teams. So I probably have the easiest strategy of all of the people here when it comes to acquiring players, because I just slapped a number in front of them. This is what I have. This is what you get. Take it or leave it. So there's not too much room for me, but it's not a.
You weren't the only one this year. You weren't the only one this year.
I mean, probably not. There's always other people that have a similar experience. But
there's a couple of us out there.
What works for us is that we have the additional reputation of just being a team that cares about their players a lot and that has a really, really good team environment to be in.
I think that, and sorry to jump in again, but that really underscores the point. Winning on a budget doesn't actually change the economic equation, right? Winning for them, just because you win more in the Overwatch League, it doesn't magically create an ROI, right? Them winning didn't drive incremental sponsorship dollars. It didn't drive live event dollars. It didn't drive merchandise sales to a point where, Jack or whoever from Cloud9 said, hey, Noukky, here's, an extra $400,000, right? And I think this is the part that fans get lost in, where they're like, oh my God, all of a sudden you're winning. Surely your ownership wants you to have more money. They want you to win more because winning is this, amazing, great thing. Esports as an industry hasn't caught up to a point where winning translates to economic dollars. And that is a kind of fatal flaw that we are all trying to solve for, where in a lot of our cases, the result is actually turning around to be, well, you should actually spend less because you can kind of retain sponsors as they are. You can retain merch to a relative level. You can retain tickets to a relative level. And you kind of be the same level of competitiveness, or maybe a little worse. But your economic outlook for the next 5 or 10 years actually looks a lot better.
It even furthers the counterpoint of like, if you can do it 1 year, why give you more budget next year?
It really
Because
shoots you in the
you-
foot, right? It's like if you did it with less, like you kind of you stay getting less, right? And
not saying that's what's
yeah.
happening to me, but it's like that could be an argument.
I mean, I heard that your performance actually shot some other budgets in the foot, right? Like, if you can do it on the shoestring budget, why is not everyone else doing that? What you guys were doing?
If we
right?
start lower, it helps everyone, right? Like,
I suppose. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was just, it's also, I guess it depends. One of the things, I mean, we have like, general managers and VPs of esports on the call, and I think every team that I've been on defines this role differently. But I think there is, at least for like the folks on this call, there is some responsibility for us as well to say, or us, or if you have a head of sponsorships or a head of partnerships, to say, yeah, like if our team is doing well, we should be able to sell against that, right? Like we should be able to, like, if you can look at the numbers of more people are watching our matches, people want to start buying our stuff, people, and then our jerseys have a jersey patch on them. There's responsibility on the team side of that as well. So I don't think it's something that we just kind of like throw our hands up and say, there's no way for us to link winning to ROI. Once like the league is healthier, then I'll invest more money because then I can start getting stuff back for my wins. I do think there is some responsibility on the teams and some ownership there to say that, like, yeah, like it's on us that if we want this league to be better, like we need to do kind of the footwork there. And I think there are teams that are better. There are teams and individuals that are better than others. So like to Grant's point, maybe you have a team that's like everyone's playing from home. You don't really have any sponsors. You're never going to have a home stand. Yeah, like for them, it's extremely hard to justify a better roster because, like, yeah, all of a sudden, like, you win 20 games and there's no sponsors, there's no live events, there's nothing. But if you can build that infrastructure such that when you start winning, you do start selling stuff, people do start showing up to your events, then you can kind of justify more spend because you've kind of made that room to grow. But that's risky because you can set up all that infrastructure, win a bunch of games, and then the things outside of your control, as far as like league popularity or whatever, don't go well, and then you're just sit there having spent a lot of money, created avenues to make money,
and then you're a great partner that did all of that and didn't get rewarded at the end of the day,
right?
And that's a really tough pill to swallow.
That hurts. Yeah.
Honestly, the way the Titans did it the last few years kind of makes a lot of sense because they, I mean, it is not a secret that they didn't spend a lot of money in 2020 and I guess 2021. But they did, like, there was a really cautious approach of how much like winning really means. For example, last season I think our social media team was like ranked 3rd in social media engagements, like overall social media websites, even though we're a horrible team, right? So it doesn't necessarily imply
breadsticks.
that
It's a breadsticks,
Yeah.
all the breadsticks.
so it doesn't necessarily imply that, like, I think breadsticks was even 2021, so they didn't even have that last year. But it doesn't necessarily imply that you get sponsorships because those people look at like, oh, how many people are actually looking at your like tweets, how many people are looking at your videos, like stuff like that, right?
And that's where it's so tough, right? Like I think we're like a top 5 team in sponsorship, right? Like I don't know how much our brands necessarily care about winning. Like I think we put out a tremendous amount of social content, and I'm sure everyone on this call does too. But like that's where, and look, this is not a panel meant to hype up Valorant, but I think when you look at a different fundamental structure to the team league relationship where you have KPIs set by the publisher around, being a certain level of competitiveness, putting out a certain amount of social content, hitting social metrics, that's when you start to see it requires teams to invest in those areas in order to receive a certain amount of dollars from the publisher, right? Like you almost need that kind of relationship in order to drive, teams to do that. Otherwise, you have kind of what economists always like to call, you have a free lunch problem, right? Or a free rider problem where everyone is kind of getting the same amount of rev share. They're kind of eating from the same pie. It's like, why, again, not that anybody wants to be a loser or not win games, but it's like, why am I going to pony up the extra, $500 to $1 million to be super competitive when, I'm not sure if I'm getting that back in cash. Which is tough. It's tough to hear. And it's not a fun conversation. And for any fans who listen, it's not a fun conversation to have. It's not something that people want to listen to. I know NBA teams deal with, similar issues, and it's not fun. It's not fun to hear about, but I think it is something to think about, just given the state of the kind of world right now.
Yeah, people just have to be realistic around, like, if there's like a 13 team like league, there's not gonna be everyone that wants to win and everyone that can like aim for wanting to win. There always needs to be feeder teams. There always needs to be like teams that develop players, and it's just unrealistic to expect everyone to spend for that like one spot out of 13.
I think that comes only when the league becomes like really economically feasible, because that's something that happens in like traditional sports, in some traditional sports. For example, in the NHL, which I have a little bit of insight in, I guess. That is basically the case. Most teams are spending more or less the same amount of money. There are some that spend less, but most teams more or less spend the same amount of money, and some are really bad. Like, it's just that the league itself is so it's so economically like sustainable that like it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if you have like a couple of bad years,
The
because
fir-
maybe you'll have some good
Firm
drop.
belief NHL is closest to a good system. Like, minus like the decline in popularity for hockey or whatever, and like the age that hockey fans have. I think NHL is closest to an economically sustainable product. NBA is like also pretty good, but I think, Aaron, your Nuggets are a good example, right? You have to have a longer term outlook, right? Like, there is a model there, but you have like a 3 to 5 year horizon on. There are times where tanking is correct in the NBA versus NHL. It kind of rarely makes sense, but yeah, it's really tough. Like, you need a league product that creates an ROI for being competitive and has a model of economic sustainability that drives teams to want to continue to invest year over year. Fundamentally.
The one thing, and I guess this is a bit of a Debbie Downer, but if we look at how the current offseason went, winners of the Overwatch League 2022, they seem to have at least put a lid on what they're going to spend. I felt like the Dallas field tried a lot. They had homestands. They had homestands that they didn't necessarily need to have, fostering like their local rivalry. They had pretty big content offering in terms of like their 5 years of fuel and all that type of stuff. And in the end, it looks like they couldn't hold the entire team. They probably made some economic decisions here and there. What's then like, what's the steelman of the argument of still wanting to win the league? Because in essence, I assume that winning the league isn't just a benefit for the following season and for that moment, but to have that plaque probably also has, benefits down the line. Do you think that's true, Pri? Do you think like both winning the league has more than one season benefits? And how did you receive, like with someone like league winning aspirations, how did you receive what the winner of the 2022 season did this year?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting case study, because this has happened a couple times, right? Like, I think Barroi, your point of the runaway experiment that Vancouver did, I think is a great example. I think this is less publicized, but the London Spitfire example from season 1, that team didn't run it back. Quick, I mean, we can cut this or not. Did they officially publish all of the contracts, like statuses, at the end of the year?
I mean, okay,
Like,
I know what I'll just say it so you don't have to, but yeah, they didn't pick up anyone, right? That's what you're going to.
Yeah, so like what I'm getting at is, you can
I
do
think
everything
the
right, and you
contracts
can do
ran out.
yeah, so you can do everything right, and you can do one thing wrong, and I'm gonna censor myself, and you're screwed.
Yeah.
Like, they did everything right, right? They built the fan base. People were gonna die in the streets for Hanbin. Like, they loved those players. But maybe halfway through the season, when you realize you have a really special group and you're winning a lot of stuff, maybe you have a conversation about maybe we don't let every single contract expire at the end of this year and let our roster get picked apart by vultures who are going to come in and say like, oh, like these are championship winning people that are going to want championship level money. And then all of a sudden you went from a roster. And again, like this is, I'm going to trust you, Yiska, to not make it seem like I'm being nasty on Dallas here. Cause that's not my
No.
intention. But like my intention is to say that like that I think that played a part here. I think if you look at like the Shock, like why didn't that happen to the Shock? I think the Shock have every time that they've had a very good season. Like I'll be totally honest, I go after Shock players all the time. Like Chris and I have like a little like a tongue in cheek thing where he's like, stop going after my players. But like they will win, they will do well, and then I can't talk to core players that they keep them around. And if you look at how I build my rosters and how we built the Boston roster, is you get a couple of these players that like people want to stick around and play with, and then it's a lot easier for someone else to say, oh yeah, like I want to keep playing with that guy, like that guy's created the game, of course I want to stay here. And so or like I want to join that team. And so I think like I am not at all privy to what happened behind the scenes with Dallas, and so maybe this isn't the case, but I think if you lose your kind of core thesis and all of a sudden like everything goes to the wind, I think at the very least it didn't help them to have to say, and again, like that has happened before. Trying to think of the last time that there's other examples in the league though of like times where all of a sudden like a team maybe didn't realize or thought maybe they thought that they had a more compelling reason to stay than they did. And then all of a sudden everyone's fielding offers, and then you, instead of being able to like keep the crew together at some discounted rate, you're competing with 19 other teams in the league who all want to pay each of your guys championship level money, which is not sustainable, right? Like if I were Dallas, like I wouldn't want to have to run it back with a roster where every single one of those players, I'm competing with 8 to 10 other teams in the league who are viewing that player as like my franchise guy. Like you cannot build a team in this league with 8 to 10 franchise guys. Like some people have to take a discount. It's just the way it's going to work. But I don't believe that's how it happened in the offseason with Dallas.
I think like what some of those, I don't think all of those contracts expired. Some of those didn't have their options picked up, right? Presumably, you don't do that not because of competitive reasons, but because the salaries are no longer economical, right? So
yeah, and again, like maybe that's the case, yeah. And I'm being very speculative here, because I actually don't know.
But wasn't it they bought players from Paris right on a 2+1?
I'm pretty sure 2022 was their option year. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of them expired.
Yeah, I was pretty sure some of them expired this year.
Yeah.
And then the options that were left were uneconomical. But
right now,
which is also something that happens like with options, right? Like options can be made.
Options take away.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, because presumably, I mean, let's say you're in that position. You're a team that looks like you can win it all. Now you're trying to negotiate in the middle of the season, and what you feasibly have to say, according to how the market seems to have gone, you now have to take less money while you're winning, because everyone else is going to align themselves with the average player salary that's going out and is evaluating there. So I guess we can get into this now. Roy, was it interesting to see what was possible in terms of like offering salaries and who was available at that price point?
Yeah, so honestly, I know how a lot of people are memeing on how this is like the Boston Uprising of 2022. It's just like some 2 extra players, but this wasn't planned at all. I mean,
they're good players.
Yeah, it just sort of happened where at the start of the season, or at the start of the off season, which again was like 1 month before the grand final, I thought there wouldn't be a lot of players available, because at that point there were like a lot of option years out there. I thought that like a lot of guys would get picked up from several different teams, like Boston, or you can think Kai from Atlanta, stuff like that. But in the end, almost everyone was available, right? So it just became like it became possible to build a much more competitive team with a smaller budget than last year, actually, for the next season, which is good for us and I guess every other team, but maybe not as nice for the players who kind of have to get a pay cut, because there was at least one situation for us where initially I was like, the players wanted to, as player wanted to have a specific salary, and I was like, I can't pay you that much. Like, it's just not possible. And at some point later on in the off season, they came back and they were like, okay, maybe I want to take what you can offer me now, right? Because no other team was like able to spend that much or wanted to spend that much, or maybe the whole situation changed where they found like a different player that they regarded as better with the same amount of salary. So this year was very interesting in terms of like player availability and how it affected salaries across the board.
When I talked to Chris, he said like he had to decide pretty early if he wanted the best player or the best fits in the culture. Was it pretty easy for you guys, Noukky, to just like get your guys and like be done with the off season?
Yeah, we had a lot of +1 options from last year, which like helped us have the core together for next year, basically. And then we just like picked up some additionals where we thought that we had weak points, which is why we, for example, released Khan, or why we like didn't stick with some of the players. Of course, like there's always like contracts running out and then renegotiations and stuff, and players want to see their options. But it was pretty like the positions that we wanted to improve on were pretty clear, like at least halfway through the season already. Like Chris and I like had a plan on how to approach the off season pretty early on, and then it was just easy to execute because what we are aiming for with Spitfire, like the very like EU focused team, there's like not much competition in like which players we're looking at versus which players other like teams are looking at.
Right. Grant, you guys seem to be, I guess, like it depends on who you end up signing, but you guys seem to be like with that approach, almost like trying to value maximize, right? From what you're
Get Amazed is cooking. He's got his stew. You saw the GIF. Like, come on, the man's got a whole thing going on. Yeah, I mean, I think this offseason has been unique in a number of ways. Not all of them necessarily positive. I think this is, and you guys keep me honest on the panel here, but like I feel like this was the first offseason where we saw players pick collegiate over owl offers.
Yeah, probably.
Which was a little bit interesting to see. I think we've seen players pick real life circumstances over all offers. A number of Korean players and APAC players who have military service, which is not necessarily unique, but have chosen to pursue that this year as opposed to deferring it to future years or whatnot. Look, I think it's a real situation that we should address, where there are compensation limits that teams have put in place given current macroeconomic trends, given the current state of the league, the game, esports as an industry, and players are finding other opportunities, which are, again, good. We want to maximize shamelessly as like a capitalistic society, like individuals should maximize their own unique opportunities in this world. But as a league and as a product, like I think we do have some work to do in terms of, in the NFL or the NBA or the NHL, like if you're a collegiate athlete or someone who's a walk-on, like you're not turning down a pro league contract. Like that should never, I don't know, someone who cares about sports, like keep me honest a little bit more, but like tell me the last time that happened, right? Even with the introduction of NIL and whatever, like I'm pretty sure you're still taking the NBA minimum or the MLB minimum coming up from minor leagues, right? So look, this year is interesting. I think there's a lot of work to do on all of our parts as a league, right? We need to figure out a sustainable path forward that maximizes compensation for players, revenue for teams, and builds a sustainable ecosystem moving forward. It's less about, I know we want to like kind of look at what each team is doing, and every team is going to have their kind of own individual perspective at the end of the day. But like, I always used to say when I worked for an NBA and an NHL team, like everyone competes on the court, but off the court, we're all friends, right? Like we're kind of all in this together to try to figure out like what is a product that makes sense and is worth investing in, and ultimately, having a fan base around. And that's kind of the work that we need to put in this off season.
Educate me a tiny bit on like North American like sports leagues and stuff, because isn't one of the issues also that the contract guarantee in esports, or like in esports leagues versus what they have in traditional sports?
Aaron, resident NBA expert, teach us.
Wait, can you?
Like, is it as easy as a player to get dropped from an NFL or like a major league team in traditional sport as it is from an Overwatch league or from a CDL team?
No, so yeah, so Noukky, you're absolutely correct, and that was what I was going to kind of layer on to what I absolutely agree with everything Grant just said. But I think my concern is that the fan bases might look at that and just zero in on compensation and say, "Oh, you know what? Players aren't being paid enough. If we pay the players more, they won't go to college." But I don't think it's that. I think it's how many years am I going to be in the league? Is an engineering degree actually going to serve me
It's
better
a whole
than
picture.
Exactly, yeah.
perspective.
yeah,
That's
it's
what I'm
like
getting
is
at.
that actually like the brighter future for me? Like I've sat in calls with Grant where we have to talk to some kids' parents and I'm trying to convince him to join the team instead of go to college. And like which at times has been much easier for me than others. And I think that's much more of what's going on as far as the choosing of a collegiate team versus an owl team, more so than the salary. I think that like the salary discussion is whatever. I think it's more of a I think Noukky is hitting it on the
Sustainability
head
thing.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, am I going to join this team, get dropped in, 2 months, and then I missed enrollment for that semester. I have a weird gap year on my resume I have to explain, and this doesn't feel so great. So I think for me, the solution, like the solve for that, is definitely on the sustainability side more so than the economic side. Like they all play a part, but I think that's Noukky, you're absolutely right. I think that's the weird thing because in the NBA and the NFL, like when you're in, and you're in for a good bit.
Yeah, that is salary the top kicker in terms of what players want, or is there also maybe a move towards some assurances? Maybe more people try to negotiate these longer termination or severance durations. Like the bits. What is the thing that is probably the most cost effective to sell a player on? I guess. Like both Pre and Grant on Justice, you famously had a pretty good pitch to those players. Like, what do you think? What do you sell to the player in order to sell your to go to your franchise?
Aaron, you want to tell the 2020 story? Or you want me to tell the 2020 story?
You go.
Oh my god. Okay, so I think things have evolved. Every offseason is different. I tell this story mostly because it surprised me at the time, right? I came into the league at the later half of the 2019 season. Had experience in other esports. Overwatch League was a little unique to me at the time. And I remember going to 2020. I think it was pretty widely publicized. We had the best travel schedule out of any team in the entire Overwatch League. We traveled like I think London actually had the worst travel schedule, Noukky, before your time, but I'm pretty sure London had the worst travel schedule, and we traveled like something like 1/3 less than them, and we were like, this is awesome, players will be really excited. We had invested all this money in a bunch of homestands. We thought we had this really compelling argument that Aaron and Annalyn were kind of making at the time to players and pitching them on coming to Justice. It was all comp. It was all, hey, I want salary. And at the time, we were not we weren't last. We weren't a budget team, but we were by no means kind of winning out in the salary conversation. And so I think the world has changed. I think, like you mentioned, there are other aspects that are more important now, or at least every player, players have had more time to understand, right? And I think when you look at Overwatch League as an esport, or Overwatch as an esport, it's not that old, right? We're only in the 6th year. Going on the 6th season of it, right? Like players needed time to realize that maybe money isn't everything, right? Like maybe
Yep.
having a longer severance or having a longer contract or being at a team with a GM that I like or a coach that I like or being in an environment that, I think is a good fit for me with fans or whatever, kind of take your pick of X, Y, and Z is more important than the extra, $20,000 or $15,000, whatever it is. I'm not saying that's the case for everyone, but I think at least from my end, I've seen an evolution of there definitely were some early seasons where cash was kind of king. And I think we've now come, at least again, in my conversations, come to a point where there are at least other pieces to the conversation. Not saying anybody doesn't care about money, but kind of my 2 cents.
Three?
Yeah, I agree
Or
with that.
bro.
Like, and I remember in Toronto, when we tried to build the team for 2021, all the players were asking for was how much money and how much taxes do we have to pay? And compared to Texas, compared to like Dallas or Houston, taxes are pretty high in Toronto. So
And Florida, by the
and
way.
Florida.
Albert's not here, but like Florida and Texas, my God.
So that always sucked, like explaining to them that they have to like give out a certain percentage of their money. But this year, I definitely had conversations where like it was more about there were other pieces in place where I want a longer contract, or I want, like you said, Jiska, like the severance to be different from, or you can just kick me at any time. So players are definitely, I mean, I think it's a personal thing where they want to protect themselves as well, but maybe they're getting smarter about how this whole esports thing works.
Has that been your experience as well, Pri?
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I think I haven't, it's unlike me not to have done the stats, but I haven't looked at tenure yet. But I think we might have like the most experienced Overwatch League team ever at this point. And I was kind of surprised in my conversations with players that usually, and I've been in these conversations with Grant before, like we'll have to sit there and we'll say, listen, like we get that you understand money, but like maybe you need to understand that like this other team that you're competing with, maybe their paychecks don't clear on time all the time, or maybe like they don't live in quite the best apartment situation that they're telling you. And this year, all of the guys, like, they knew. They were like, "Oh, yeah, like, I already did that thing where, like, someone offered me a bag of money, and I went there, and I hated every minute of it, and I would have traded all of that money just to go play with my friends." And, that was, like, a pleasant surprise this season, is, like, I didn't have to, like, lay the trail of breadcrumbs to, like, maybe money isn't everything. Like, every single guy on this roster has had that opportunity to, like, just go and get paid as much as possible, and they realized that, like, getting paid X salary, playing with my friends on a team that takes care of me, that is like running this team the way that I want it to be run, versus like 1.2x. It's such a no brainer, especially like the salary ranges that like these kids and these players are getting, right? Like when you first come into the league, like maybe like $100,000 is like, oh man, like 100 versus $120,000. That seems so different, but like it really isn't. If you look at like your quality of life, like studies have been done on this, where like if you look at the life of a player that's making 100 versus $120,000, they're doing the same things. They're buying or not buying the same Balenciaga jacket. But the difference is that the player that's making the $120,000 that maybe went to a team that doesn't speak his language, that is putting him in an awful housing situation, like they can't buy their way out of that situation. And players that have had that experience are much more willing to say, okay, I'll take this salary and I'll join this team because I know what it's about. And like I've been down that road and now I want this other thing.
Yeah, I literally this year literally sent pictures of Vancouver to some guys to be like, look at this city, it's actually beautiful.
Oh, I did. Oh, yeah, I did a tour. I did a facility apartment tour on my phone, and I was sending that to people. I was like,
Yeah,
"Look at this."
yeah.
I was like, "Yeah, this is gonna be great." Like,
It's funny how like negotiation points change like over the course of like the last like 2 or 3 years, where I had issues negotiating with players for salary last year against Vancouver in specific. This year it was like one of the asks, which is pretty funny, was like, can I get more food budget so I can bulk more? which is really cool. Like they just care about like different things because they know like the time is it's the majority of your year that you're spending with these people and that you're spending like around the area that you're gonna be in. So you want to have like you want to save your mental rather than save the few more Ks of cash that you get.
Yes.
I talked to a couple of high-profile players this offseason, and it seemed to me very interesting that despite probably like them losing, like going down to probably maybe as much as 25% of their prior salary, they could imagine playing on London. That would have been like, it wouldn't have been a top priority, but it could have possibly happened. So is it also about like the story that you can tell the player? Like, okay, we're going to have this us against the world, and we're actually also going to win something. Like, how big is winning, Noukky?
Winning is not that big as long as you have like as long as the team expectation is set to like you don't want to be first or you don't want to have like a certain rank. If the this is the cool saying of like it's the journey and not necessarily the goal. Like it's all about friendship, it's all about this, it's all about that. But actually like it's attractive for some players. It does if you have like a clear plan of what your team is gonna be structured like and what your team like incentives and goals are. Then you can convince people that have the same values and fit with the team synergy like pretty easily.
Okay, I need at least.
We sold a lot of structure as well, just team structure, what we wanted to build. That was kind of a big deal for us. That was like always the first thing in conversations. This is what we want to build. Like, if you buy into that, we are glad to have you. But if not, then
Yeah,
you can
this
go
really
somewhere
nice
else.
That's
team
a lot
with,
of
like,
value of a
cement
GM,
systems.
right? Like you have the three of them, right? Like I very rarely talk to players on a day-to-day basis, but you have like Amazed or Aaron or Noukky or who sell them, right? It's their job to get a player to buy into what they're trying to build and say, hey, come here because you trust me. And I mean, everyone on this call is pretty good at that, I think. At least from my experience. And yeah, that's ultimately a pretty attractive draw for players coming to a team.
Have you experienced building this roster differently, Pri? In terms of like, I feel like roster building in top teams or presumed top teams works a little bit differently than at the lower end. And I think that also goes down to the coaching aspect. One question I love to ask coaches is like, how much do you think is getting the right players and like signing the right team? And someone like DePay would go like, in my experience, 85 to 95% of whatever happens in the season is me signing the right players. The rest is in-season coaching. Then I go to someone like Gunba, he gives me 70%. I think I talked to Get Amazed, that came down to 60%. Is it different to like build a roster that has all this star power, like an insane amount of trophies, than like building maybe a mid-tier budget roster?
Yeah, I think there's some things that are different, and then there's definitely some things that are not. I think as far as kind of that, how much of your season is predetermined by who you sign, in the off season. There's definitely like I mean, the esports world loves their tier charts, right? There's kind of like mechanical tiers, right? And there's definitely something to like you can't coach someone to just click heads better. Like you really just can't. Like yes, you can. Okay, fine. You can like talk about like positioning and whatever, but like at the end of the day, they're like these players do fall into a certain level of mechanical ability, and I think you can coach and team build them kind of plus or minus one or two, like some of the great coaches and perspectives. So I think that in general we were a little bit more open to kind of saying like, you know what, yeah, like let's get this person who's kind of like a bit of a mechanical freak and is just like great at the game and say, you know what, I think the difference is that those players in their mind, they're like, I am a top 5 guy in my role in the league. And so I expect to be on a roster that is like a top 5 in the league, right? Because otherwise my team is holding me back, right? Like if my potential is this, anything less than this is my team holding me back. And so I think in the past, my pitch, if that's not where we're expecting the team to be, has been a little bit more like what we're talking about on this call, right? A little bit more about, winning isn't everything. Culture matters a lot. Building like a good environment where like, yes, you're going to have the opportunity to win, but also you're not going to burn out. Versus like, I would be lying if like this offseason, especially when we got towards the end of this roster build, if I wasn't just sitting down with these people and like showing them the list of people that we'd signed so far and been like, it's probably pretty good, right? You probably want to play with these guys. So like that was a little bit different just because, especially I think I would say like of our 8-person roster, the first 4 signings were very similar to previous years, where it was like, this is, we're building this culture, this is the team we want to build. But then once we had kind of our core, and other players were perceiving kind of what tier that placed us in, then it was a little bit more of like, okay, now do you want to join these guys? Now is this like a team that you want to be a part of?
Noukky, the inverse logically then also follows, right? It's you had a role star on your roster, like Sparker is a very good player. Is it hard to keep these guys not from like joining these top 5 budget teams and like take the paycheck there?
It is a kind of a two-edged sword where you kind of want them to like look at their options, but also you want to like keep a certain level of like competitiveness in the team. I personally like when I differentiate like my personal opinion versus like what is best for the org/team. I personally like for my players to go to better teams because I feel like they deserve it after the development that they had in my teams. But when it comes to our own team, Chris and I have the philosophy that we definitely like want to have a team that synergizes like really, really well, and that's one of our goals. Like, I think without talking badly about like my players, like it's no bad intentions here, but you saw the top 6 finish was our skill ceiling. Like that was where we got gapped in certain roles, and this is where the development basically like stagnated. Which is nobody's fault or anything. It's just like this is where it ended. This is where we placed. This was our like high roll at that point, and there's no shame in that. Definitely isn't. And so
It's
yeah.
impressive
I
because
think
so many teams
Yep.
don't hit that. So many teams can't say they like maximize the value from the deal. That was awesome. Yeah.
I think the best way to look at this, I feel like giving a percentage of like how important something is probably hard, but the best way to look at this is like every team that you put together, just in terms of like on paper talent, will have like a range, right? So
Exactly, yeah.
for London, for example, maybe the range was like 6 to 13, and they hit the 6th spot instead of the 13, where you probably are like expected to finish somewhere in the middle of that. So maybe London was expected to finish around 10th or something like that. But then the rest of
Except in Yiska predictions.
the
Or everyone
part
else,
that's like
yeah.
the part that fills out that range is like your structure and your coaching, right? So what you can do by signing players is just to give you that range, but then you have to kind of see where you land.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that what theoretically success could mean to or should mean to everyone, like maximizing the potential?
I personally think yes. Like I always like to present. I always like to look at correlations of budget to performance, and if I see teams that have like really high budgets but are not performing well, for example, the Gladiators over the last few years, then I'm like, yeah, maybe you didn't do well. Sure, you have some really good players, and okay, you placed like pretty well here and there, but overall, your budget to performance ratio is pretty bad. I and if you look at something like London, I'd be like they've been the most impressive team in the last few years. I think London last year, maybe Valiant like a couple of years ago, in season 2 or something, was doing the same thing. Where for me, and I'm glad that Chris got like the coach of the year for that, because for me that's where again you do the best job that you can as like a coach, and maybe it brings your players more opportunities in the future, and that's kind of what you should want, I suppose.